I was standing in the attic of our suburban home, surrounded by the smell of old cardboard and dust, trying to get through some cleaning I had put off for far too long. At 38, juggling my job as a high school teacher and being a dad didn't leave me with much time for these weekend projects, but today I was determined. As I moved an old stack of magazines aside, something caught my eye, an old leather album. It was tucked away, hidden under some junk, and I couldn't resist the urge to flip through it. As I settled onto a nearby trunk, I opened the album and found myself staring at pictures of my family. My heart softened as I lingered on a recent photo of my daughter, Emma. She's 14 now, and it struck me how much she'd grown. But as I stared longer at her face, something stirred inside me, something I couldn't quite shake off. Her features didn't seem to align with what I remembered from when I was her age. Her nose had a little curve mine didn't, and though we both had blue eyes, hers had an almond shape I didn't recognize in my side of the family. I moved on to a picture of my son, Liam. He's 12, and again, a sense of unease crept in. His skin was just a shade darker than mine, his hair a richer brown, and while I tried to brush it off as just part of the natural mix of genetics, the feeling that something was off kept growing. That night, after the kids were in bed, I found myself sitting in front of my laptop in the dim light of the study. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of my nagging doubts. Before I even realized it, my fingers had typed out DNA test kits. I sat there staring at the search results, my heart pounding in my chest. Was I really going to do this? "Hey, what are you looking at?" My wife, Laura, called from the doorway. I jumped, quickly closing the laptop. "Oh, just some stuff for school," I lied, feeling a stab of guilt as I glanced her way. She didn't seem to notice. "Don't stay up too late," she said, giving me a quick smile before heading to bed. As soon as she was gone, I reopened the screen and clicked Order. 3 DNA test kits. 1 for me, 1 for Emma, and 1 for Liam. I didn't know what I was expecting, but something deep inside told me that I had to know the truth. Weeks passed, each one filled with more anxiety than the last. Every time I looked at my kids, I found myself trying to see parts of me in them, trying to convince myself that this was all just paranoia. But finally, the email came. I opened the results with shaking hands. My own test came back as expected, mostly Irish, with some European heritage. But Emma and Liam's? They showed a significant percentage of Mexican heritage. This couldn't be right. I stared at the screen, my heart sinking. "No, this can't be," I whispered to myself, my whole world starting to spin. That night, unable to sleep, I made up my mind. I had to know more. I needed answers, and I couldn't do this alone. The next day, I hired a private investigator named Frank. We met at some out-of-the-way diner, and as we sat in a quiet corner, I told him everything. "I need to know if my wife's been cheating on me," I said, my voice low. "And if she has, I need to know with who." Frank nodded, making some notes. "Any idea who it might be?" I shook my head. "No clue. But my kids, they might not be mine." 2 weeks later, Frank called me, telling me he had something I needed to see. I met Frank at his office the next day. As soon as I walked in, I knew it wasn't going to be good. He had a stack of photos laid out on his desk, each one more gut-wrenching than the last. There was my wife, Laura, smiling, laughing, in the arms of another man. It was clear they had been more than just colleagues. "That's Miguel Ramirez," Frank said, his voice flat, like he'd seen this kind of thing too many times. "He's her boss at the construction company she works for." I stared at the photos, my heart pounding in my chest. Miguel was tall, with dark hair and the same features I'd seen in my kids. I didn't want to believe it, but the resemblance was undeniable. This man, Miguel, had been in my life all along, hidden behind smiles and handshakes, while fathering my children. "How long?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Frank looked uncomfortable, shuffling the papers in front of him. "They've been seeing each other for at least 15 years. Well before you got married." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. 15 years. We'd only been married for 14. That meant this had been going on before we even said our vows, and I had been none the wiser. Every memory I had of our time together felt tainted, poisoned by this secret she had kept for so long. Frank pushed more evidence across the desk, love letters, emails, hotel receipts. My world kept crumbling with every piece of paper I picked up. This wasn't just a fling. This was a full-blown affair. The kind where you build a second life with someone else while pretending everything's fine at home. I couldn't hold it together anymore. This can't be real, I said, my voice cracking. But it was. All the pieces were falling into place now. The DNA results, the doubts that had gnawed at me, and now, this mountain of evidence. I stared down at a photo of Miguel, seeing Emma's almond-shaped eyes in his face, Liam's darker complexion mirrored in his skin. My whole life had been built on a lie, and I wasn't even sure what to do with that information. The weight of it was suffocating. What now? I asked Frank, my voice hollow. I didn't know where to go from here. My marriage, my family, it had all been a facade. Frank sighed, sitting back in his chair. That's up to you. You can confront her, or you can let it sit. But if you're looking for revenge, well, there are ways to get that too. I didn't say anything for a while. I just sat there, staring at the pile of evidence that had destroyed my life. Revenge. I wasn't sure if that was what I wanted, but the thought lingered in the back of my mind. When I left Frank's office, I felt like I was floating through a fog. Nothing felt real anymore. I drove around for hours, trying to process everything, but the only thing I could think about was how long Laura had been lying to me. 15 years of deceit. How could I have been so blind? Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, I knew I had to confront Laura. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stood in our bedroom doorway, watching her scroll through her phone, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. "Laura," I said, my voice strained, barely able to keep the tremor out of it. She looked up, sensing something was off. "What's wrong?" she asked, putting her phone down on the nightstand. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "We need to talk." The second the words were out of my mouth, her whole demeanor changed. She stiffened, her eyes narrowing just slightly, as if she already knew what was coming. "What about?" she asked, her voice cautious. I could feel the rage boiling up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm, even though every fiber of my being wanted to scream. "I know," I said flatly. She blinked, confused. "Know what?" "The affair," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know about Miguel. I know everything." For a second, it looked like she might try to deny it, but then her face crumbled, and she broke down into tears. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't want it to be like this. I didn't mean for it to happen." I just stood there, staring at her, feeling like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. I didn't say anything. I didn't even feel the anger anymore. It was like a switch had been flipped, and all I could feel was cold numbness. "How long?" I finally asked, though I already knew the answer. She wiped her eyes, struggling to catch her breath between sobs. "It's been a long time," she admitted. "Before we got married." The confirmation of what Frank had told me hit me like a punch to the gut, but I stayed quiet, waiting for her to continue. "We were young," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't think it would last. I didn't know what I was doing, and then you and we started getting serious, and I thought I could end it, but..." Her words trailed off as she stared down at her hands. "But you didn't," I finished for her. She shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was scared. I didn't want to lose you, and by the time I realized what I had done, it was too late. I'm so sorry." I stood there, letting the weight of her apology hang in the air, but it felt empty. "Sorry," I repeated, my voice hollow. "You think sorry makes up for 15 years of lying to me? You think sorry fixes any of this?" She broke down again, sobbing uncontrollably, but I couldn't bring myself to feel any sympathy. "Not yet. Not after everything. Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" I asked, my voice cracking with the sheer effort of keeping it together. "Why lie for all these years?" She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "I was scared, John. Scared of losing everything we had. Scared of what it would do to the kids, to us. And when I got pregnant with Emma, I thought maybe we could just move on. That maybe she was yours, and I wouldn't have to tell you." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. "You didn't even know if she was mine?" I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. "You had a child, and you weren't even sure if I was the father?" Laura nodded, fresh tears spilling down her face. I didn't know for sure until recently. I didn't want to believe it myself. I felt the room spinning, my mind struggling to process everything she was saying. My life had been a lie, built on secrets and half-truths. And Liam? I asked, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it from her. He's Miguel's too, she whispered, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. The confirmation felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Both of my children I had raised, loved, and cared for, weren't mine. It was like my whole identity as a father had been ripped away in an instant. I've been raising someone else's kids, I said, more to myself than to her, the realization sinking in. I've been living a lie. Laura reached out, trying to touch my arm, but I recoiled, taking a step back. Don't, I said sharply, my voice filled with a mixture of hurt and anger. Don't touch me. She pulled her hand back, her eyes filled with regret. Please, John. I never meant for it to be like this. I love you. I love our family. Can't we try to move past this? Can't we try to fix it? I shook my head, the idea of moving past something this big feeling impossible. Fix it? How do we fix this, Laura? You've lied to me for over a decade. You've destroyed everything we built together. There's no coming back from this. She sobbed harder, but I couldn't bring myself to care. My world had been shattered, and no amount of apologies or tears could change that. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the bedroom, needing space, needing to breathe. I couldn't stay in the same room with her right now. I went down to my study and closed the door behind me, leaning against it as if I could somehow shut out the pain. I sat at my desk, staring at the laptop, my mind racing. I thought about the private investigator, about the evidence he'd gathered, about how easily I could take everything from her, just like she'd taken everything from me. The thought of revenge crept in again, this time stronger than before. Maybe that's what I needed. Maybe that's what would make this unbearable pain just a little easier to handle. I pulled up the legal documents Frank had sent me, financial records, emails, hotel receipts, even more damning evidence of the affair, and I realized I had everything I needed to ruin her and Miguel. But what would that do to Emma and Liam? Could I really blow up their world, too? They were innocent in all of this. They didn't ask for any of it. As I sat there, staring at the screen, I felt torn between two desires, the need for revenge and the need to protect my children. I couldn't let Laura get away with this, but I also couldn't destroy the only family I had left. That night, I didn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind battling itself over what to do. By morning, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to stay silent, but I wasn't going to destroy my kids' lives either. I needed to talk to someone, and the first people that came to mind were my parents. The next day, I drove to my parents' house, hoping they could offer some comfort or at least help me figure out what to do next. My parents had always been my rock, and I trusted them more than anyone. I figured if anyone could make sense of this mess, it was them. When I arrived, the familiar scent of my mom's apple pie greeted me as I stepped inside. It used to bring me comfort, but today, it only reminded me of how shattered everything felt. I found my family gathered in the living room, my mom, dad, and my sister, Emily. They looked up when I walked in, sensing that something was off. I need to talk to you all, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't waste any time. I launched into the story, starting with the DNA tests and ending with the damning evidence from the private investigator. As the words tumbled out of my mouth, I could feel the weight of the situation crashing down on me all over again. When I was done, there was silence. The kind of silence that fills a room when no one knows what to say. I looked around, waiting for them to offer me some kind of comfort, some kind of guidance. But something was off. My mom wouldn't meet my eyes, and my dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My sister exchanged a look with my brother, Michael, who had come over while I was talking. "What?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "What aren't you telling me?" Emily was the first to break. "Johnny, we knew." Her words hit me like a truck. "You knew?" I said, stunned. "What do you mean you knew?" My dad cleared his throat, his eyes heavy with guilt. "We found out about Laura's affair a few years back," he said quietly. "We thought it would be better not to tell you. We didn't want to hurt you, and we thought maybe it would end on its own." I stared at them in disbelief. "You thought it would be better not to tell me?" You let me live in the dark, raising kids that aren't even mine? You thought that was protecting me. My mom reached out, but I pulled away, too furious and hurt to even let her touch me. We didn't want to see you suffer, honey, she said, her voice trembling. You seemed so happy, and we didn't want to take that from you. Happy? I barked out, a bitter laugh escaping me. You let me believe in a lie. All of you. How could you do this to me? My brother, Michael, spoke up then, his tone defensive. We didn't think it would help, bro. What good would it have done to blow up your life back then? What you didn't know couldn't hurt you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own family had kept this secret from me, and they had justified it by thinking they were sparing me pain. But now, standing there, I felt more betrayed by them than I did by Laura. Does it look like it didn't hurt me? I yelled, my voice shaking with anger. I trusted all of you, and you let me live a lie. 4 years. And now, my whole life is destroyed because you decided what was best for me. My mom started to cry, but I was too far gone to care. Johnny, we thought we were doing the right thing, she whispered, but the damage was done. I turned away from them, shaking my head. I can't believe this, I muttered, more to myself than to them. I felt like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare, and everyone I trusted had played a part in keeping me there. As I stood in the doorway, ready to leave, my dad spoke one last time. We're still your family, son. We're here for you, no matter what. I paused, but I didn't turn around. No, I said, my voice cold and distant. I don't need any of you anymore. With that, I walked out of the house, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. My family, the people I had thought I could always rely on, had betrayed me just as deeply as Laura had. I got into my car and drove, unsure of where I was going, just needing to escape. By the time I got home, the sun had already set, and I felt a strange kind of resolve settle over me. I couldn't trust anyone. Not Laura, not my family. The only person I could rely on was myself. As I sat in my study, staring at the pile of legal documents and evidence in front of me, I made a decision. I was going to take control of this situation. I wasn't going to let Laura, Miguel, or anyone else dictate how my life would go from here. It was time for me to take matters into my own hands. In the days that followed, I threw myself into action. If Laura and my family had lied to me for all these years, then I was done playing the fool. I wasn't going to be the passive, trusting guy anymore. I was going to take charge of my own life. I met with a divorce attorney named Richard, someone who had a reputation for being aggressive and efficient. He specialized in cases like mine, where infidelity was involved, and he didn't waste time sugarcoating things. Mr. Harris, Richard said, as we sat down in his office, you've got a strong case here. The infidelity alone, along with the DNA evidence, will put you in a good position. You're not just looking at divorce. You're looking at full custody of your kids and potentially a significant financial settlement. The idea of winning, of coming out on top, was tempting. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the guilt. As angry and hurt as I was, I didn't want to destroy Laura completely. I didn't want to ruin her for the sake of revenge. And most importantly, I didn't want Emma and Liam to be caught in the crossfire. I don't want to hurt the kids, I told Richard. I just want to make sure they're okay through all of this. I want custody, but I don't want to make this messier than it already is. Richard gave me a knowing look. I get it. We'll keep the focus on you and the kids. But trust me, when it comes to divorce, it's better to strike fast and hard. I nodded, though a part of me still hesitated. This wasn't just about Laura or Miguel anymore. It was about the future I wanted to build for Emma and Liam. I didn't care if they weren't biologically mine. They were still my children. I had raised them, loved them, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. As the legal proceedings got underway, I focused on the steps I could control. I moved money into accounts only I could access, quietly gathering every scrap of evidence Frank had uncovered. I had the private investigator dig deeper into Miguel's business, and it wasn't long before we discovered more than just an affair. There were financial irregularities, possible tax fraud. If I wanted to, I could bring his entire career crashing down. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat in my study with all the evidence spread out before me. I stared at my laptop screen, the cursor blinking in the email I had drafted to the IRS. It would only take one click to send it. With that, Miguel's life would unravel, just like mine had. But I paused. Would destroying him really fix anything? Would it make me feel better? Or would it just pull me deeper into this mess? Before I could decide, I heard a soft knock at the door. Laura stood in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked fragile, like someone who had been living with her own guilt for too long. "John," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" I closed the laptop, not ready to make any decisions yet. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. She stepped into the room, her hands trembling as she tried to hold it together. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've destroyed everything we had, and I'm so sorry for that. But I can't stand this distance between us. I can't stand not knowing where we go from here." I looked at her, my anger simmering just below the surface. "Where do we go from here?" I echoed, shaking my head. "I don't know, Laura. I really don't." She took a step closer, her voice desperate now. "I still love you, John. I always have. And I know you don't believe that right now, but it's true. I want to fix this. I want to make things right. I couldn't hold it in anymore." "Make things right," I said, standing up from my desk. "How do you make up for 15 years of lying? How do you fix something this broken?" She started to cry again, but I didn't feel the sympathy I once might have. The truth was, I didn't trust her anymore. I didn't know if I ever could. "I need time," I said, my voice cold but honest. "I can't just forgive and forget. Not after everything that's happened." Laura nodded, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll give you space." As she left the room, I sat back down, staring at the email again. The temptation to send it, to destroy Miguel's life just as mine had been destroyed, was strong. But something in me hesitated. I had already started the divorce process. I had taken steps to protect myself and the kids. Maybe that was enough. In the end, I didn't send the email. I wasn't going to take the path of revenge. I didn't need to burn Miguel's life to the ground to move forward. What I needed was to focus on my kids and the future we could still have, even if everything else had fallen apart. Weeks passed, and Laura and I barely spoke. The divorce moved quickly, and the judge granted me full custody of Emma and Liam. Laura didn't fight it. She knew she had no ground to stand on. I made sure the settlement was fair, ensuring she wasn't left with nothing, but I wasn't going to sacrifice my children's well-being for her mistakes. As the legal battles ended, I turned my focus to rebuilding my life. Emma and Liam were my priority, and I threw myself into being the best father I could be. It wasn't easy, but slowly, we started to heal. I realized that the only way to truly move forward was to let go of the anger, to stop holding onto the betrayal like a badge of honor. And so, I started to forgive, not for Laura or for Miguel, but for myself. For the sake of my kids, for the sake of the life I still had left to live. And in time, we found a new rhythm. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was ours. And that was enough. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.